Welcome to our Coaches Kitchen Table Discussion Series, where you join myself and the top coaches and influencers in the sport community, where we talk about a variety of topics related to coaching, athlete development, and so on. In part two, the three coaches will discuss how club coaches can help their athletes play volleyball at the collegiate and university level, as well as how much involvement club coaches should be in the recruiting process in contacting post-secondary coaches. What advice would you guys give the coaches of club coaches at 16, 17, or 15 or 14, doesn't matter. What advice would you give them that they could go on to best help their athlete make, let's say, reach their goal of playing post-secondary, either being college or university, both one on like volleyball development, character development, and then finally the process of and Brenda's going to talk in detail about it, but what could the coach do to facilitate that process for them in terms of seasonal planning and just remembering to do it consciously versus just hoping it naturally occurs.
Maybe Dave, we can just go back and forth a little bit on some of those because there's a lot there. I'm going to start with one, because this could go up and down a little bit, but make sure, don't assume that athlete wants to or should or, play post-secondary. Do they really want to do it? And I think that's a strong role for the coach. Like, hey, laying out the positives and some of the negatives. I mean, you're giving up other things if you're going to try and compete and play at that kind of level. So understanding that, I think you're well placed in that regard, because is this your dream or mom or dad's dream, let's say? So that would be one role for, a club coach to take in early on. The second one, I would say, and I think we're developing this way, but, and I'm going to treat it really broadly, but in a couple of different ways. So number one, Lawrence Awula, who coached our national team a few times and a bunch of national teams, hit a line which was, don't ignore your best player. And a bit what he meant by that is don't ignore not just about technically, tactically, but their mental development, their emotional development as well, i.e. don't necessarily let them get away with more. You might want to let them get away with less if you're going to prepare them well for the challenges of a transition to post-secondary. Because if they've had the most success, they kill most of the time, regardless of what their, how hard they worked at their spike approach. Let's just pick one thing or whatever, bombed one in and then made an error on the next ball. And, that doesn't look like it's changing. Those kind of approaches are going to be really hard for the longer they go on, harder to change. So I would say going as if that club coach can really look at where can this, not where they're at right now, but where can they get to? And, that's never going to be easy. So because all coaches want to win, but how can you actually be impacting the individual development of all your players, right? And setting those right cultures early on, that's going to make our jobs so much easier, so much better, and so much easier. And so less about the outcome for your 14, 15, 16, 17, more about building process, growth mindset you mentioned earlier, working through that, because we're inundated, obviously, in our society on the outcome piece. So, and that's not good. At a certain point, you're going to be up against, every athlete is going to be up against players that are either as or more experienced than them, more skilled than them, more physical than them. So if you look at it from that point of view, how is that person going to react? And can you help coach them and guide them to get some self-awareness earlier in their life to reflect and go, that's probably not going to cut it at whatever that next level would be. So that to me is just, it's not about specifics. It's about that becoming a better holistic all-around coach.
Dave?
The man's the best for a reason, and I think you hear it. The only thing I'd add that is that there is a little bit of physical, technical, tactical, mental. And I think if you're going to focus on 14, 15, 16, the younger levels, the more physical capacity you can help build at that stage, the more it's going to help retain some of the techniques. And we're not going to redefine the wheel later on. The techniques don't change, but the more physical capacity they can do to withstand the training levels and understanding how to win, not just, yes, winning is important, or we wouldn't keep score. I don't want to discredit that. However, I think understanding how to win is really, really important. So if it's just, well, we feed number 12 all the time and we win, I'm not really sure that that's the solution. But I do think that there is some tactical understanding, and I know that they may not be able to do it all, but they should at least have an exposure to it or understand it so that they can think with the end in mind. But I do think that the physical capacity at the younger ages are going to set them up for longer term success if that's what they really want to do. But I agree with Doug that, they're going to have to get used to that competition model. And quite honestly, the margins get so small that if they don't understand how to be successful, they won't know how to deal with those really small margins. And then they won't be able to put in the work that is going to be required for them to get on the right side of that margin. So I think it's really important that kids understand what they're getting into, why they're getting into it, and how they need to be successful within that. Not just that this is our system, but this is the system that makes this group the most successful. And yes, there are other things that we could do, but based on this group, this is what's going to be most successful. And if you get to another level, you might play a different system, and you need to understand that. But I get kids going, well, I've never done that before. I don't know what you're talking about. I'm like, well, then you've already separated yourself in the pack from the ones who do. I think that it's really important that at that 14, 15, 16, they understand the game and not just, and I think with Doug's point, very first point about, do they really want this? It can be used to reinforce some of those behaviors down the line. Because if I say, hey, Doug, last year you told me that you really wanted this, but your behaviors aren't really reflecting that right now. So if you said you really wanted to do this, but you're not doing this day-to-day work, then what has changed? And how do we either get back to that path or reevaluate the path you're currently on? So I think that them understanding that it is their goal or their mission and not mom and dad's or their coaches, then I think it's easier reinforced when the work gets a little harder and the margins get a little smaller.
I got two questions on those, what both of you guys have said. They lead to this on the same topic. So they say they say they don't want to play post-secondary. So let's say it's 17, 18U, and they say they don't want to play post-secondary. Should they be playing on a high-performance team where the goal seemingly the goal for that is to excel beyond that year? I guess at 18U, why am I playing 18U club volleyball?
Probably because you love volleyball, I hope. You want to
volleyball. So,
and you want the social. You've played with this group maybe for 5 years.
Right. But does the impact, I guess the commitment level then becomes in question, right? Because there's such a short-term focus that how do I put in that extra work doing video analysis, or the coach is asking me to journal about what I'm seeing between games, and I'm going, well, why? I guess that as a coach, you have to figure out how to sell that athlete on how to be fully engaged and fully committed for that year. Because if they're not fully engaged or committed, that's going to impact the team, right? Because then it becomes for that athlete about convenience. Well, I'll do it if it's convenient. Because we see that at high school. High school.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sure you. Oh, at high school, absolutely. Yeah.
So that becomes the question that I'm always challenged with, is that when you're at the top, in theory, your team is the top team in the club, and you have 8 girls or boys that want to play post-secondary or that's their dream. And you have one or two that's filling in those spots. How to keep them motivated on something else so that they stay fully engaged, so that they support their teammates on trying to achieve their long-term goal. That becomes, I mean, that's that's the coach. That's part of coaching.
Yeah, I think it's going to be very situational, but by and large, I'd actually say, having coached club, I'm actually more worried about some of the ones 17U. They're spending more time freaking out about which university coach is watching them or not watching them.
Colin,
Just play.
Yeah.
Just get out there, be a good teammate, and compete hard. Like, whether don't be thinking about next year, we got to get kids thinking about that less. And that's, even though that's my job to get them thinking about it maybe more, overall less.
Yeah, that comes to other sets of questions about getting signed early and not getting signed and all that. Dealing with that at the 18-year level is fun.
Colin, I was going to suggest something a bit different in that I think the focus should be on this year. And as long as the athlete's achieving what you set out, you should be satisfied with this year. Because in a lot of cases, those are future system builders too. Just because they don't want to play post-secondary doesn't mean they might not come back and coach club or become an official or just play in an adult league later on because they love volleyball.
Right.
And it may just be a realistic, like they just don't see themselves cutting it, for whatever reason. It might be that they have to work, and don't have the time. Could be many, many things, but I think your focus is in the wrong place if you worry about that.
Right.
Unless they're not doing what you're asking.
Right.
And that would apply to any athlete, right?
And then along the same lines, then the opposite side, let's say they're saying, and again, I've experienced it this year, was the athlete saying, I'm not really interested in post-secondary anymore. And it was that person's dream, and she did everything possible that you could do to become your best athlete. But then when the crunch time comes down, it's that I'm afraid that I might not make it, right? And it's easier to say I don't want to do it versus taking the risk. And the challenge of with doing it in an appropriate way to challenge them to take on the risk and say, what's the worst thing that could happen, right? Is selling them on what's the worst thing that could happen. If they say, sorry, we don't have a spot for you, well, then you put it all out in the line. Because when you're my age at 50, you're going, I wonder what if I would have. If I would have trained a little harder, Brenda wouldn't have cut me. If I didn't go out the night before physical testing, I might have made the team. And those things stick in, you want to help those athletes remember that stuff, because sure, it's a big, the athletes live those goals, right? For 4 years about playing post-secondary, and then it's on the brink of doing it. And it's scary for them. And it's it's really for us as coaches to help them work through that process, and that it's just a process. It's another game, another match. It's just, you may lose, you may win. But as long as you've done everything you possibly can to make it happen, that's all you can do. And you can walk away with your head held high and you know the answer. And I think that's part of ours as club coaches, is to really be aware of that fear factor, determining the exterior answers coming from our athletes sometimes. And I think it's more, you see it in guys that say, oh, I don't care, I don't do that, I don't that. Whereas girls, it's more of an emotional thing for them. But they're both the same in terms of, we got to address that, and we got to use our social emotional skills to help them get through that part as well. So do you guys have any advice for coaches that maybe don't have the experience of dealing with that? What's some things they could do, or how to have a conversation about that type of thing?
Well, I do think fear can be an excellent motivator. I also think that fear can be a very big paralyzer. And I think there's a fine line that can be drawn there. So I think now, with today's student athlete, fear is much more of a paralyzer. And I do know that there are still athletes out there that do respond, but fear of failure is a reality. We have to work their way through that. But yeah, I think, the answer there's no right answer to your question, Colin, but I do think that one solution can be with role definition and clarification. And as long as everybody understands what their role is and what they're supposed to do, and those change as they develop, right? Like, so sometimes the best players weren't always the best players at the start. So there is different roles and clarifications that need to be addressed at that stage. But yeah, you know what? I said this at the right beginning of the show, was that sometimes our roster turns over on the bottom end a little bit more than I would like, because life trumps sport. And sometimes volleyball becomes not that important anymore. And just because it is to the coach and how much we've invested in them, well, if it's not important to them anymore, we can't want it more than they do. So yeah, I know we've got a lot invested, but it's still their life. It's not ours. And we have to be honest and sincere with them about that at that stage. So we can try and help them through some of that stuff, but life changes. And we can try and clarify their roles as to where things have changed. But the reality of it is, we can't make them want it. And those are the things that sometimes we're looking for in coaches, where you can see that, you know, maybe they are, you know, Doug mentioned it, they're always looking at the coach, or they're always looking at their mom and dad. And is that their source of security? So I don't think there's any right answer, but I do think role definition and clarification can very much help. And, you know, we could have an entire different show on how to manage fear and anxiety.
Colin, I think it's not an uncommon thing to have the courage, especially young women, you know, self-confidence and the courage to take risks. There's some great books, you know, even if they start with Brene Brown, or I think that's probably a good one, you know, just get them kind of reading and learning about courage and bravery, and you know, maybe they'll change their mind. But I think it's not uncommon.
Yeah, I think it's something that we have to explicitly teach. I use the word teach because I'm a teacher, but I think we explicitly have to teach those types of social emotional skills with our athletes too. And I think club is a great opportunity to do those things, because you're succeeding and you're failing at all times. So you can learn to deal with that, and you can use that in your life and practice those skills and practice the skills of dealing with those things. So I think, and I'm, you know, going back to our very first session with Vicky, talking about how that's how the long-term athlete development 3.0 now is moving towards that, saying that we as coaching association has done a good job of technical, tactical, and not a bad job with physical, but now we got to start implementing the social emotional side to our coaching components, which will be a challenge. You know, you get your, as Mikhail would say, he's an engineer. He's not a teacher, so he doesn't have those skills. So it's going to be interesting how we help our club coaches develop these tools going forward, because we're asking more and more from our volunteer coaches, and that's going to be a challenge, I think, going forward for coaches to deal with these issues. But I think you know, even having conversations like this will help those coaches recognize that we're all together and we're trying to move forward. And we should, you know, as Brene says, we're going to own our own story. And we're going to make our errors, and we're going to, you know, we're going to learn from our errors. We're going to own them, and we're going to move forward, just like we're going to ask our athletes to do that. So our coaches can, you know, practice what they preach, and turn it from not just only on the court errors, but also in terms of trying to deal with the social emotional side errors as well. So that's good. Doug, did you want to add anything to that on the female side? I'm
going to be careful not to, because it'll take too long, and you know, there's good stuff, but keep it moving.
Right on. All right, so down to a couple more questions here about coaches, how they can help. How involved should and this is a little easier one, I think. How involved should the coach be in reaching out to post-secondary coaches on behalf of their athletes?
Again, a lot of these, it's going to depend a little bit on who, I think, the situation and the athlete. So I really don't mind from an out-of-province coach that they've contacted me. Expect you know, an email from X, and here's a little background around it and why. So the second time could be, you know, like there's times, because we get a lot of, email if something gets dropped or get back to her and want clarification. Personally, I've got no problem. Like, I think it's a good thing. I don't want to get emails. I've got these 9 athletes, right? They're all graduating, and here's, what I think you should recruit them. But this person is really interested in your school because of X, and they may be a little bit behind developmentally in these areas. But if you're looking for something like this is why I think they might be a good fit, like their knowledge. So if you do a little bit of research or homework, I find that, it doesn't happen actually that often. So I don't know what you've found, or Brenda used to.
I'm in the same school as Doug on this one. If I get an introductory email from a coach, it's not an issue. If there's lots of follow-up on it and more of the conversations being driven by the coach, now I've got a little bit of an issue with some stuff. I'm not recruiting a coach, I'm recruiting a player. So I need to foster that development or foster that relationship with that potential student athlete. So sometimes all a student athlete needs is a little bit of a connection. And if they don't have it and their coach can provide it, I'm okay with that. But as soon as you figure out who's driving the bus, then you can kind of sort it out from there.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think
it is one way for an athlete to stand out maybe a little bit more, is if they get that additional support from like one key coach.
Right. Yeah, so I saw that in action, and it does make a difference, especially if an athlete's looking at a province and the coach may have connections with those other coaches in terms of they know each other. I mean, our community is pretty small, so.
And especially calling if I know that coach. Like if I'm familiar with that coach and they reach out, and I encourage that. That's part of that network I was referring to before.
Right, for sure.
And then if you don't know that coach and let's say you're a younger coach and you don't have that connection, you could say for further feedback, contact Dave Preston, right? Like, I know you know Dave or whatever. And if you feel you need more, he'd be willing to speak on behalf of her too, or a coach to a provincial team or whatever the case may be. And it's just maybe one more link.
Perfect. That's good. All right, so the last question on this section then is just to the athletes. What advice would you give to their athletes for the best chance of finding a spot, and not, Brenda's going to talk about the academic stuff, but in terms for you guys, for the athlete in terms of developing their skills, developing their athletic abilities, and then finally in terms of how they should contact you, what's the best way?
I think it's just encompassing from what we talked about before. I think they've got to advocate for themselves. They've got to be able to reach out. It shows good initiative. Be prepared. Have the tapes ready. Put your work in. I would say right now, if you're unfamiliar with the coach, then you got to reach out to them through an email or something. I guess right now, social media is an okay introductory as well if you don't have the coach's contact information, but most of our information is available on websites now, so it's not that hard to find. But I would say just be prepared, advocate for yourself, and be persistent with it. If this is something you really want to go after, then make it happen.
I'll just give you a couple of specifics, a few do's and don'ts that I've seen. The more personalized you can go, interested in your school because of your strong academic program in this, make sure you get that academic program correct. Okay.
I got lots of dear Mr. Wilson, or dear Mr. Willis, or dear, Wilson, seriously, it's no research whatsoever,
Not just the school, but show that you've done the homework around it. Because if you're going to say this is one of my top schools and I've been looking at it and I like your program because of this, you want to go, okay, it's easy to say that, but is this going to all 37 U Sport women's coaches or not? And so extend that a little bit more, that they've actually looked at the roster. I see that you are actually graduating some outside hitters this year, or, you know, you know, do you have some space? Because then I'm going, okay, they have at least dialed in there a little bit and understand more. So, you know, we all like more personal stuff. So, you know, frankly, I'm on a couple of recruiting service things, and I just don't even, you know, they're in the States, they're based out of the States. And I think it's because UBC has NAI programs in some sports, like we compete south of the border. And it's just like, it's hit delete as soon as I see it's there. Like I may have missed a kid somewhere along the line, but I'm willing to bet probably not, because I think this is going to hundreds, maybe thousands of institutions, right? And so I'm not going to spend my time on that. So that would be the contrast. And you don't need to make it super long. Like I'm not, this isn't an assignment for English 12, right? This is boom, more info.
Yeah. What did I have? Oh, homework. Okay, yeah, sorry. In terms of their volleyball, what should they be doing to develop their volleyball? Because my communication to my team and to my camps is always that don't give up an opportunity to improve yourself, because your competitors right now may be doing that. Is that sort of the same philosophy you guys would give to them? Is don't give up an opportunity to develop your skills, develop yourself physically, just because you've got to set yourself apart from everybody else, or at least move yourself up the line in terms of those skills and take advantage of trying to outwork your competitors.
I think Dave earlier on touched on something I really agreed with, was looking earlier on at like the idea around raising your physical capacity, your ability to train, not just doing more camps. I'll say, I think there's a difference between that, because I see this a lot, like, okay, I got to keep doing that. But actually that awareness, and the coach can help with this, like what's actually going to be your limiting factor of making it to the next level, right? And so, you know, take a look at that in relation to the competition at that one, and that's going to help your club team anyways doing that, or high school program, if you can help that kid do that. So on the women, sometimes that's like Dave made an example. He goes to other coaches who can hit a ball at a system, right? Like, so are we getting enough reps? Like you don't hit well out of system, and you're going to have to do that, right? Like coaches are going to look at that, because we're going to be out of system more than 50% of the time. Like I'm sure you can create the other things going, okay, we're not spending that much time on blocking in our program because it's not going to help us that much, but you're going to need to learn to block better if your goals are to do this. So helping guide that way. For women, it's, for a lot of them, is we need more women that hit the ball harder and from a higher point in our country. So can we help those players that might have that potential to do that better? And I'll live with one more mistake or two more mistakes. Next, can they hit it off the block? Can you give them an edge by having them use a block, not just, you know, like those kinds of things, like dealing in. That's where I think you help that athlete for sure. You help a university coach, and you're probably helping your.
Perfect. Anything, Dave, on the guys' side?
Yeah, Colin, I think if you ask that question to 50 athletes, you get 50 different answers. Right. So I think every athlete should know what it's going to take for them to reach that next level. Some are going to need that physical capacity, but some are really, really physical already, and they're lacking some of that technique. But I think it's in human nature for people to want to do more often what they're good at. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to develop. So they may have to spend some time at different points, but I don't think that it's going to deviate from that chart that I talked about before, where it's physical, technical, tactical, mental. You know, they have to be physically capable of handling our training volume, and they have to be technically. It doesn't matter what system we're playing if they can't dig. If they can't dig, it doesn't matter what our defensive system looks like. So there's got to be some technical capacity there. And but again, that's every athlete will be at a different continuum in that point, and the coach is there, I believe, to help each of those athletes raise their level to do whatever. I don't, you know, I know there's a saying that's, you know, rising tide raises all boats, but every athlete is at a different point out there. So you're going to raise all the tide, but you also have to deal with those individual boats.
Right. It's good. All right. Just before we get Brenda to go through the step process, Adriana had a question. So Adriana, if you want to turn on your mic and you can ask the panel your question.
Hello.
Hey, Dave.
There's no recruiting at this stage, right? There's no.
It's already done. He's already committed. So.
Where?
Sao Paulo.
Oh.
Yeah, my question, nice to see you. My question was more about like last year, and like every year, I see kids there, they commit with some schools, and after they commit to a school, they shut down. And this happened in their age 17 or 18. If they commit in 17, they're not fully shut down, but if they commit in their commitment to happen in the age 18, I saw teams, and this happened with my son team last year, like half the team already commit, and they couldn't play.
They check out.
They check out. Like it was conversation with the players, say that, conversation with the coach, and how coaches for university, I don't know if this happened, can help with the coaches in the club or the athletes understand that this is not time for them to not play. It opposite. It's a time for them to play more, and because they're not starting any level yet.
Yeah.
I think you answered your own question.
Compared to everybody else, right?
Yeah, I agree, Adriana. And I think that's a big thing is that when athletes do commit or whatever, they think it's an end goal, right? It's okay, I've arrived. I'm now there. And so it's almost a relief. And I think one of the things as coaches that we can help that is when I talk about behaviors, and if we say, hey, look, Doug, we said that we were going to be working at this level and you've committed to this level, but your behaviors recently aren't reflecting that. So we either got to reassess what's going on here, whether that's your training and your or your competition level, your compete factor, all those kind of things. But I think having a good foundational relationship with that athlete, it's easier to have that conversation. But they see it as it's okay, I've arrived and I can relax. And I think that is a statement to the process as well, because it's so taxing on the athlete, and that they get there just like, oh, and it's a relief. And so we got to help them make sure that they say, look, if you're not developing, as Colin mentioned before, somebody else probably is. So although you may think you've arrived, everybody else in that program is continuing to work harder. And I think you're going to need to understand that a little bit more too. So there is a human component to it, but there's also a development component. And that's where we talk, I think, about that role of definition and clarification. And hey, Doug, we need to keep going here, right? Like you're not there yet. You may have reached a milestone, but you haven't reached, and the way our football coach puts it is that there's no goal line here. There's no finish line. Right? The development doesn't have a finish line. You just keep going and going, higher, faster, stronger. So I recognize the issue. I think the more foundational relationship you have with the athlete, it's easier to address. But I think when you hold them to role definition and clarification expectations, it's easier to have that to say, look, what you're doing isn't what you said you were going to do. And what do we do about that?
Yeah, I think as a club coach with 18 new players, I learned from my mistake was with the 96s, our goal was we want to play university volleyball. Everybody's goal was to do that. And once we got to 18U and people signed and they made the volleyball, then they sort of plateaued at first year university, because I've done it. I've met my goal, and we never talked about what comes after that. And I think part of with our as coaches, especially with the ones that we know that are going to play post-secondary, we got to get them thinking, how do I be an all-Canadian? How do I be an all-star? What do I got to do to set other goals on top of that, and to move your 4 years through that, to help them not think that I made a team and that's it. Like I plateaued and now what, and you get lost. Like have it as a stepping stone to other goals going forward. And then on the other hand is within a team, it's important for coaches to explicitly have that conversation at the beginning of the year saying, listen, some of us are going to get signed early. Some of us are going to be stressed by not getting signed. Some of us are not going to get signed. But we're as a team trying to focus to the end. And each of us have our roles to develop and help each other try to achieve that goal. So if you're signed early, we need you helping those other players get signed by showing and playing your best so that they can show and play their best in competition. And putting that role and responsibility on each athlete to support each other as they go forward. Because I know it's a huge around Christmas time, you could see that happening. And I've seen it with other teams where it just explodes to a individualized program versus a team cohesion that was together for 5 years. Now it's done because they've met that one goal, and that like you said, it's a huge mental release for them. So it's important for coaches, I think, to have that explicitly be talking about it all the time. That we're here to support each other. We're happy for each other when there's successes, and we're there for them when we're there to help when there's the failures, and support each other through those times. So, serving boyfriends, girlfriends, family situations, and then including university acceptance or rejection as well. I think that's an important aspect that if club coaches, especially at 17 and 18, you have to take on and really be cognizant of it as they coach through the season. Anybody else want to add anything to that one?
Can I just say one more thing?
Yeah.
Doug, you coach Shanice, right?
Pardon me?
Shanice Marcel.
Yes.
You did a great job with her because I coach her in the national team now in the beach. And she really talked very well about you and about the program and how you guys, the years that she passed with you was incredible. Was the best years that she had in her life in terms of school. Just went to kind of.
Right. Well,
awesome.
she made me look pretty good as a coach.
What do we hear from the athletes?
I only bring on the best, right? I mean, I'm not.
No, she was. I mean, actually, she's got some good blog posts too. Just generally, but even going back, compares her. I think her blog post comparing like NCAA versus U Sport would help a lot of athletes. Actually, like just the difference. It's not saying one's better, but it gives them a bit of a sense. I felt in just reading it. But yeah, she's the best part of coaching post-secondary and probably younger ages is seeing these guys develop over their 5 years and then see what kind of people they become afterwards. So
For sure.
that's the part I like.
Great. Thank you, guys. So now we're going to get Brenda to just sort of give the athletes and coaches a sort of a time frame thought process around academics and post-secondary in terms of when you should start thinking about it, what you should be thinking about, sort of a chronological timestamp of what you should be doing, just to give that last piece of tools for coaches and for athletes and for parents to finish off. And then we'll just wrap up after that with a few, if there's any other questions.
Colin, you need to give me back the screen share.
What? Multiple versions? You can't share it?
Doesn't appear so. Maybe I have to.
It's not coming up. All right, I'll just give you a host and you can do it all. But give it back to me. Don't keep it.
Of course.
Make host. All right, you should be host.
Okay, can you see that?
It's coming. Yep.
Everyone can see it. Okay, I'm going to go through this really quickly because it's almost past my bedtime. But he had asked me, Colin had asked me to go through like preparing for the recruiting process, less from the coach standpoint as the parent or the athlete standpoint. So very quickly, I'm going to say that the very first thing that families should do or individual students should do is figure out kind of on a broad scale what they want to study. And that can happen in grade 10 if they already know, or I would say early in grade 11, they should already be starting to do some work and searching the different websites of schools to find out about admission requirements, who has the specific programs they're interested in, and all of that. And of course, when the time comes, they apply through the Ontario University Application Centre, only for schools within Ontario, direct applications if they're going outside the province, and they will also have to manage the SAT process if they are thinking of going to the States. Then in terms of getting recruited, I'm just going to say that most coaches don't mind a highlight reel if it's really short, just to catch their eye, or actually on the flip side to quickly decide, no, that's not what I'm looking for. And then potentially you can start collecting full match video for the coach to potentially view, especially in this COVID environment. Full match, try not to edit it. We are not dumb. We know when pieces have been taken out. Good idea to provide the coach with your competition schedule, or even invite them to some tournaments. Most coaches do want you to communicate and not your parents, and show some initiative. Come to matches. You can potentially request a tour or a meeting with the coach. So you take some initiative in all of this. Certainly the blue chippers, the process will take care of themselves from the coaching end. But if you're just under that, or you don't feel that that's happened for you yet, you can certainly initiate the process. In making the decisions how to start, I think my advice would be to create 3 separate mindsets and lists, one around academic programs, one around the volleyball program, and one around life. And of course, what I mean by academic program, very quickly, I truly believe that students have kind of a 2-sided cliff: what their interests are and what their aptitudes are. And if they stay in that lane between those 2 things, they really are setting themselves up for success academically. And then to understand what the options in the program are, whether they want co-op. I've had students who wanted engineering, and only after they got into the program did they find out we didn't have aerospace, as an example. So if you have a real specialty, you need to know about it in advance. As athletes, you probably want to know if you're allowed to reduce your course load from the standard, load to an 80% load, so you can do it over 4 or 5. This is an interesting one in academic programs. I think it's important to athletes. There are a lot of programs that are a pyramid system. So for example, if they take 1,000 engineers in first year, they might have 750 seats in the second year class, and 600 seats in third year, and 500 seats in fourth year. So they're actually looking to weed out 50% of the students in a program, and others are much more cylindrical. So if they take 1,000 students in first year, they have 1,000 seats all the way through. And in fact, if 10% of the class fail out or change programs, they'll actually take transfer students to keep that cylindrical type of system in place. So that's it. I think for athletes, an important thing to know, because it changes the culture academically. If it's a pyramid, it tends to be a competitive environment, and you're competing against some people whose sole thing is academia. And so it's very hard to stay as competitive as you'd like. Where in a cylindrical system, it's much more cooperative. People tend to help each other do well because you're not competing for that seat in the next year. And of course, issues around work study and co-op. Some places require you to do a co-op. It can be very difficult in your athlete pathway. So that's something to consider. I'm not saying what's right or wrong. Other things you may want to ask are, what percentage of people graduate? What percentage of the people, double percent, of the people have job placements before graduation or within the first 6 months or whatever? And of course, about costs and tuition, awards and bursaries. So those were all really well dealt with by Dave and Doug. So I'm just going to keep going. You really need to know what you're looking for. And to find out what they're looking for. And when I say what you're looking for, I'm also thinking about, there are some athletes, Dave said it really well, about the athletes who they want the assurance of the spot and all that. They want to be the player that you're going to build a program around. Others want to play with the best, even if it means way less playing time. So as an individual, you need to figure out what you want and then how that's going to fit into what they want. So hopefully coaches will be honest with you. I would say connecting with the coaching staff, learning about their leadership style, their philosophy. If you're the kind of athlete that hates to be screamed at, you need to know if you're leaning towards a school with a screaming coach, or vice versa. If you want your butt kicked all the time and it's a coach who trusts that you're going to motivate yourself, that probably won't work. So all the things around the program, goals, budget, I think the guys talked about this really well. And just, where does it fit in the school's importance? If it's really not handled as an important thing and it's important to you, that might not be the best mix. Okay, and then the third pillar, I think, is just life. And that's the one that I think lots of times athletes forget about. They're so obsessed with, making a volleyball decision that kind of works with an academic decision. But what I mean by that is, do you want to be close to home? Doug alluded to it. Sometimes they're homesick if they go too far away. How are you going to handle that? Do you like big cities, small cities, big campuses, small campuses? Those are all things to consider. As Doug said, if you break your leg and you got to spend the next year on a campus without the sport you love, are you going to go, what the hell am I doing here? It has to fit. Same thing with the residents, be it on campus or off campus. Meal plans. These are all things that can translate into anxiety for an athlete. If they don't have food you like, if you're not eating properly, if you can't get sleep in residence, or it has to be a double room and you've never been in a shared accommodation before in your life, those can be issues for you. So it's really important. Proximity to amenities, is that important to you? Things like the cost and the proximity of off-campus housing, and is housing easily available? I know people who commute, 20 minutes on a city bus or more to get, an hour on a subway to get to school. That's fine if that's what you want, but I think it should be weighed in to your choices. And of course, campus vibe, fan support, that's all part of the life piece that I'm talking about. So all three should align for you to make a good choice. I think one thing everybody should know is in Canada, we have formal campus visits and informal campus visits. And you're entitled to one formal, which means some funding in that visit, whether it's fully paid for or whether they buy you lunch. It doesn't matter. As soon as you spend money, it becomes a formal campus visit. So you're entitled to one formal visit every 365 days, or 2 years in a row. 365 days apart is probably a better way to say it. But there's no restriction on informal visits. You can come and watch home games in their gym. You can potentially watch practice if you're doing that of your own accord, and those are informal. But as soon as anything's structured or funded, it's a formal visit. I would also advise you to visit the city, not just the campus. Take a tour. You can get academic appointments with undergraduate advisors in various programs if you have specific questions. Try to meet players, meet the coach. We've talked about that. Yeah, it's a good idea to talk to athletes. Try to learn a little bit about their culture and how they operate and that sort of thing. If you are considering leaving the country, know the facts. Things like you can only get 4 years of funding, but typically an athlete needs at least 5 years to finish school. It can actually cost you more in the 5th year in the US than it would to just pay for school in Canada. And injury clauses and things like that in your scholarship are things you need to know about in the US. So if you're considering that, make sure you know the facts, because an awful lot of athletes end up coming back because they didn't. Okay, and I'm going to finish it off just with asking the right questions. If you are academically inclined, make sure you don't have too many conflicts between what you want to study and the training schedule, because that can set you up for failure on both ends. And if there are conflicts, how are those handled? Is there an integrated support team with academic support, therapy, strength and conditioning? Are those all built into the program? Do you have to pay for them? Are they full-time within the department? Those kinds of things are really important to know. So I encourage you to ask a ton of questions, this PowerPoint's going to be posted along with Colin's presentation. And I think for me, one of the biggest downfalls, you know, we were talking about pitfalls earlier. If the athlete is the kind of student that needs mom or dad to say, go do your homework all the time, you know, if they've created a big structure and now you move away and you have no structure, that's a downfall. So if parents are listening, try to create some independence by grade 11, some accountability, of course, but some independence so that the student athletes learn the skills they need to have to be independent learners and athletes when they leave home. That's it for me.
Awesome. Dave and Doug, do you guys have anything to add to that? Other than it was great.
Oh, that's awesome. Very comprehensive. I think, you know, as much of a structure as we want to put a little box around this, recruiting is very individualized. You know, there's a lot of templates that you can follow, but you just got to do what's right for you.
Right. The only thing I would add is use your guide. In high school, I would use a guidance counselor. The guidance counselor has lots of connections with academic programs, can get those meetings set up for their academic tours. They're a useful tool, especially nowadays. I would really emphasize using your guidance counselor at school to help you out, get through the process, especially if you're starting to look in grade 11, because it's tough making those decisions. Okay, if anyone else has any questions, since there's only 3 of you coaches left on here, you guys can just turn your mic on and ask a question if you want, or make a comment. Since it is my kitchen table, no worries. We're all friends here. If you leave your mics off, I assume that means you have nothing to say. So I will want to personally thank Doug, Brenda, and Dave for coming on and giving up some of their time to give us this great information on post-secondary education and what coaches can do and what athletes should do in terms of helping themselves and helping their athletes reach that next level. And again, as you coaches, as you've seen us throughout all these sessions, that these people that are up there on that next level of volleyball for us, you know, either with Volleyball Canada with Carrie McDonald or Donna Sales, or even Sport for Life with Vicky, all these people are very personable and willing to share their information with you. So please don't ever hesitate to reach out to any of us, or especially them. I mean, I'm just a neophyte sitting in here trying to connect us all, but I think it's a great opportunity for coaches to, again, broaden where they've come from and what they're doing, and recognize that the people that we put up on pedestals, they deserve to be up there because of their work ethic, but they're also very approachable and they'll come and talk to us. So please don't ever hesitate to reach out to them. This is the end of our Coaches Kitchen Table discussion series with special guests, youth sport legendary volleyball coaches Dave Preston, Doug Reimer, and Brenda Willis. We would like to thank Dave, Doug, and Brenda for coming on, and everyone for watching. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to like the video and add a comment. We welcome suggestions on topics you would like us to discuss in the future. Remember to subscribe so you don't miss a video.